Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed Kimji. The word cross comes from the Latin word crux. In fact, the word cross in Latin is crux. What does crux mean? If you look in the dictionary, you will see that crux means a pivotal moment or a vital time in which a decision must be made. Crux is the the point that matters most. If I say to you that the crux of my argument is such and such, I'm indicating to you that's the core of the argument. That's the essence of the argument. If you're at a crux moment in your life, you're at a moment where everything you can say hangs on that, on the decisions that you make at that moment. So, in the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 16, Jesus says that any follower must take up the cross and follow him. Every person must, who wants to be a follower in his spirit, must deny himself and take up his cross and follow him. What does it mean to take up the cross? Well, if you even look at the figure of the cross, you see that at the point between the crossbar and the main bar, you find different crossroads. If you can think about the human being as being at that point um, where you find the unity or the meeting point between the main bar and the crossbar, you see that the human being is at a crossroads. So to take up the cross can be understood to mean that you are understanding that particular moment as a decisive moment, as a pivotal time, as a moment where you need to make a decision, but there are many possible ways you can go. When are we at a crossroads? Well, I guess at some level, we're always at a crossroads. We always have choices to make. And the nature of choice is such that when you or I make a choice at any given moment, what we're doing is we are choosing one particular thing over every other option that we have. And at any point, we have really infinite options. So every choice that we make involves a sacrifice. Every choice that we make is a sacrifice. Every choice that we make is um, a choice that sets us on one course, but in moving in one course, we deny all other courses. And the question, of course, is what choice do we make? Do we make a choice that affirms our life and the life of other people, or do we make a choice that um, is not good for ourselves or for other people? And if one is going to make a moral choice, then the standard for one's action is not what we feel like doing at any given point. The standard of our action is what is the right choice to make? What is the moral choice to make? What is the choice that we can make that um, affirms the value of every person, where in making a choice, I do not deny you, and I also do not deny myself. But in the verses that I'm looking at in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 to 26, which I'm just going to read, then Jesus told his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world, but forfeit their life or forfeit their soul? it's such an interesting collection of verses. It always is amazing to me how much is contained in, how much is communicated in the scriptures. So let them deny themselves and follow me. Well, there are two kinds of denial at a very simple level. I can deny myself in the sense that I deny my own value. I deny my own worthiness. I deny my own dignity. And when one denies oneself in that way, then one goes down a road that is very harmful to oneself. That's not what Jesus means here. When you deny yourself, what you are doing in this context is you're denying that which in you takes you away from what you know you ought to do. So if I'm going to deny myself in the sense that Jesus is talking about, I'm going to focus on what matters. I'm going to focus on what I ought to do, and I'm going to deny whatever sense feelings I have or whatever temptations I have not to do what I ought to do. And in that sense, denial is actually affirmation. When I'm denying myself, what I'm doing is I'm affirming my life, and I'm affirming your life, and I'm affirming the life of every person if I'm going to act according to the moral standard that Jesus says is the essential teaching of the Hebrew Scriptures. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. The equivalent is love your neighbor as yourself, not more than yourself, such that you sacrifice yourself to your neighbor, and not less than yourself, such that you sacrifice your neighbor to yourself. So, yes, I have to deny myself at any given moment because I have to deny all roads that are not moral. I have to travel down, you can say, the narrow road. And we know that Jesus makes the distinction between the narrow road where few travel and the wide road where many travel. It's very easy to give in to our momentary feelings or our momentary sense impulses and simply to do things that we want to do, regardless of whether or not they will harm ourselves or other people. And we know that many people in the world live that way, moment to moment. It doesn't mean that if one simply follows one's blind feelings, that one will not make money, or one will not, be liked by others, or one will not gain a kind of reputation that one wants. But one will not live up to what it means to be a human being. And so when Jesus says in verse number 26, which I've already read, what will it profit a man to gain the whole world but to forfeit his soul? What does it mean to have everything that you want, to have all of your sense feelings, the desires of the immediate desires of your life fulfilled at a simple level? You have a new car, you have a new house, you have money, you have new clothes, people like you, you have influence, you have power, and so on. But to have given up one's dignity, such that the road to all of these riches has actually been littered with people that we have hurt. And it's not really that difficult to make money and to be liked by people if one is willing to sacrifice one's soul and one's moral being. We only have one life, and we only have one chance to live it. And so it's a very tragic thing when a human being lives his or her life in such a way that he or she makes the world a worse place than it would be without him or her. So, yeah, there are two kinds of denial. Every moral action will demand denying oneself. Every moral action will demand denying one's immediate sense, impulses, instincts, um, wants, and really making a choice that is the right choice to make. And so when Jesus says in chapter 5, which I have discussed at some length in my video on my interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount, that blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, that's a concept of desire that is more powerful than whatever natural instincts or wants we have. That's a concept of desire, a concept of hunger, a concept of thirst, where we are fully committed, fully focused, completely dedicated to becoming the person that we ought to be. And that demands denying oneself, taking up the cross, taking up one's moral obligations in light of a time when we have many, many different choices to make, fully committing to those or obligations and making a choice that involves denying our own immediate wants or impulses. Now, is the idea of judgment. We all have to make judgments each and every moment of our lives. And it's a burden that you and I will never be able to relinquish. To be human is to be a thinking being. Descartes' famous discovery in his meditations on Marxist philosophy really established the grounding for modern thought is the relationship between thinking and existence, between thought and being. I think, therefore I exist, which also involves the formulation, I exist, therefore I must think. We're never going to be in a situation where we don't have to think. And to think involves making judgments. It involves distinguishing between what is right and what is wrong, between what is good and what is evil, between what we ought to do and maybe what we feel like doing. So we're always going to be in time in such a way where the weight of moral obligation is on our shoulders. And then what do we do? How do we live in that moment? How do we live when we're presented with crossroads or alternative things that we can do? And really, our own being is such that we are not fully reconciled with ourselves in a sense that our instincts and our impulses and our sense feelings and our moral obligations always cohere. We are in discord with ourselves. There's a cacophony of voices in us. And sometimes we hear people say that, oh, the devil in me said this and the angel in me said this. So we hear, obviously, we're pulled in different directions. That's not a bad thing. That is the nature of what it means to be a thinking being. And so when Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, in such a paradoxical, seemingly contradictory way, do not judge. That is really striking because do not judge is itself a judgment. In fact, it's a very strong judgment. When Jesus says do not judge, he's making a moral judgment about judgment. And so the very instruction or command, do not judge, folds in upon itself. It contradicts itself at a merely literal level. And we then are forced to interpret what he is saying. But we have seen in the videos that I have made so far that the entire scriptures, both the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament, they are unrelentingly commanding us to interpret what is said, to distinguish between letter and spirit, between saying and meaning, between reading with a heart of stone and reading with an open heart. We know that Jesus does this. We know that Jesus demands that his hearers do this. That's why he speaks in parables. And we know that the writers of the Gospels do this because they are themselves interpreting the Hebrew scriptures, making Jesus interpret the Hebrew scriptures in their narrative, and in that way, commanding, instructing us to also interpret their own writing. So do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. So when Jesus speaks about hypocrisy in the context of trying to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye while having a log in your own, he's speaking about a bad kind of judgment, a kind of judgment that is judgmental, a judgmentalness that is very critical about everyone and everything on the outside, but that doesn't have the capacity to turn that judgment inwards and to be critical of oneself, to be self-critical. And hypocritical literally means below the critical level, uncritical. And when we are uncritical, what we are doing is we are holding two standards. One standard for others, whom we judge in a bad way, whom we are criticizing, and one standard for ourselves. It's very easy for me to say, do not lie. I hate it when people lie to me, but how often do I lie to others? It's very easy for me to say, don't judge people simply by their appearances, or don't make a judgment about a person based on his or her outer appearance. But how often do I make a judgment about other people based on his or her outer appearance? And there are many times, probably a countless number of times, where we make judgments about people using a standard that we do not apply to ourselves. And when we do this, we are hypocrites. We are using double standards. We are saying, do as I say, not as I do. And we don't like hypocrites, but really there is likely hypocrisy within each of us. And so when Jesus says that the measure you give will be the measure you get, what he is indicating is that the standard that you use to judge others, you are indicating that you are subject to that very same standard. And so if you don't show mercy to others, you are saying that you are not worthy of mercy being shown to you. When you are saying that it's okay for me to dismiss another person based on how that person looks or how that person smells or how that person appears to me, I'm indicating that I'm not worthy of being treated as a human being, regardless of how I look, regardless of how I smell, regardless of how I appear, and so on. And we know that, just by looking at popular culture and the things that people value, that people tend to value um, appearances. I'm not merely speaking about physical appearances. I'm speaking about appearances in general. I'm speaking about appearances of success, appearances of reputation, appearances of strength, appearances of the body, um, just appearances in general. Um, I don't know how much time people spend on marketing themselves in contrast with actually producing something. It is almost insufferable for me to watch many videos online because there's so little content and there's so much marketing. And I'm sure many of you have the same experiences. Even in getting emails, there's always some pressure to influence you to do something or to buy something or to be someone, and almost nothing about developing your inner strength, inner character, uh, and moral capacity for judgment or capacity for moral judgment. So, do not judge is, in fact, the strongest possible judgment. And what could that judgment even mean in the context of scriptures, where the whole task of the human being is to sharpen his or her capacity of judgment, to know God, to distinguish between true prophets, true teachers, and false prophets, false teachers. You will know a teacher by his fruit, or you will know the true prophet by his fruit. And so, how could we even distinguish between good and evil if we didn't judge at a literal level? How could we distinguish between true and false if we didn't judge at a literal level? If we took that judgment, do not judge, and understood it in such a way that we are not to make any judgments at all, what could that even mean? So, at a literal level, at a merely literal level, it is absurd. But at a figurative level, at a deeper level, once one thinks about it, one sees what Jesus is trying to say. And of course, shortly after, Jesus says, "Do not judge." He makes the judgment between uh, dogs, and between human beings whom you should give what is holy to, and dogs. He says, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine." Now, of course, he's making the judgment between people who are worthy of receiving what you have to give and people who are not worthy of receiving what you have to give. People who are worthy of receiving what you have to give are people who will listen to what you say and will take what you say with a good heart. People who are not worthy are people who will maybe listen to what you say, but only for their own ends, or take what you say with an evil heart. And also people who, simply will not listen to what you say. Those are also people to whom you should not really waste your time with. Who would counsel giving oneself to people whom we know will take what we give and use it against us? That would be foolish. When I was growing up, there was this religious concept of the Day of Judgment. And the Day of Judgment, I understood at the time to be a day when, after we died, when God would judge whether or not we were good or bad persons, a good or bad person. And the mythology around this was so extreme and so silly, but I couldn't really appreciate it at the time. I'd mentioned in prior videos that the whole idea of the separation of the soul from the body is a pagan idea. It certainly was a dominant idea in ancient Greek and Roman thought because the body in human life was considered an evil. Hence, you have just brilliant Greek tragedies that have been produced that constantly, relentlessly show that to be human is to suffer. And that's actually the first principle of Buddhism, ancient Buddhism, not modern Buddhism. But the first noble truth is life is suffering. Not life involves suffering, but life is suffering. So this day of judgment was a day that I understood at the time to be a day of reckoning. And it was a motivation to be a good person because you didn't want to fail in this day of reckoning. And it was a motivation to avoid being a bad person because you did not want to be held accountable for all of the evil you have done and have to pay for it in hell. And hell was a world of fire and suffering where the soul would go, the soul who was evil would go and suffer eternal torment. And I discussed this at some length in my video on the meaning of hell, because it has nothing to do with that. But really, it's every moment that is the moment of judgment. Judgment is the time of our lives, every moment of our lives, a time where we make judgments about the world, a time where we make judgments about others, a time where we make judgments about ourselves, and a time where we are judged by others. And ultimately, what matters above everything is judged by God, which means that we are held accountable to the moral demands that our own existence requires. And so God here would be the moral standard, or understood as the moral standard, or the behind that one cannot get behind, that which always sees you, no matter how much you might try to hide. And it's very interesting because in the book of Deuteronomy, it is written that the word of God, which in Jesus understands to be love your neighbor as yourself, or treat others as you would want others to treat you. The word is not beyond the sea, so that you will ask, how can we cross the sea to get it? And it's not up in the sky so that you will say, how can I get there to receive it? The word is very near you. It's in your heart. Look at what is said in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 30. It's a very remarkable passage because you see that the word of God is not, the idea of God is not a supernatural concept. It in fact expresses what is essentially human, what is essentially true. So in chapter 30, verse number 11, surely this commandment that I am commanding you today is not too hard for you, nor is it too far away. It is not in heaven, that you should say, who will go up to heaven for us and get it for us, so that we may hear it and observe it. Neither is it beyond the sea, that you should say, who will cross to the other side of the sea for us and get it for us, so that we may hear it and observe it. No, the word is very near to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart for you to observe. See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, and death and adversity. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I'm commanding you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, and observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous. And the Lord your God will bless you I'm jumping a bit. But if your heart turns away and you do not hear, but are led astray to bow down to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him and holding fast to him. For that means life to you and length of days so that you may live. Choose love, not death. Death is sin. Clearly, when you sin, when you live in a way that you bring death to others, when you deaden your own soul, when you deaden the soul of others, when you make the world a place that does not express true life, then you are bringing death. To choose life means to choose yourself. It means to choose humankind. It means to choose other people. It means to choose a way of living that brings life into the world, that brings life into the dead, that resurrects, you can say, the dead, because resurrection is a resurrection of the living. It's a resurrection of those who are dead in their own being, or those who live as dead and who are awakened to a new life, a true life, a better life, a life that expresses the light and not that brings darkness. Now, of course, the idea of the cross, to get back to my original subject of this talk, is central in the Gospels, because we know that Jesus is crucified. At a literal level, it is very, very important to say a few words about crucifixion. And I'm just going to read from an article called The History and Pathology of Crucifixion. Crucifixion in Roman times was applied mostly to slaves, disgraced soldiers, Christians, and foreigners, only very rarely to Roman citizens. Death, usually after 6 hours to 4 days, was due to multifactorial pathology, after effects of compulsory scourging and maiming, hemorrhage, and dehydration, causing hypovolemic shock and pain. Hypovolemic shock is the condition when the body loses so much fluids, blood, water, that is not able to supply the vital organs that is essential for life, supplying the heart and the necessary fluids to the heart to pump enough blood and so on. But the most important factor was progressive asphyxia caused by impairment of respiratory movement, so suffocation, resultant apoxemia, deficiency of oxygen, exaggerated by hypovolemic shock. Death was probably commonly precipitated by cardiac arrest, caused by vasovagal reflexes, involuntary reactions of the autonomic nervous system, initiated inter alia, that's among other things, by severe anoxemia, severe pain, body blows, and breaking of the large bones. That's what would happen before the crucifixion. The one to be crucified would be beaten. And that's what happens in the story about Jesus's crucifixion in the Gospel of Matthew. The attending Roman guards could only leave the site after the victim had died, and were known to precipitate death by means of deliberate fracturing of the tibia and or fibula. These are the long bones in the the leg. So unbelievably excruciating. And the writers, Retief and Cilliers of this article, The History and Pathology of Crucifixion, speak about how or mention at least, how excruciate actually literally means out of the cross. Crux is cross. So sometimes the death was precipitated by the actual deliberate breaking of the bones in the lower leg, spear stab wounds into the heart, sharp blows to the front of the chest, or a smoking fire built at the foot of the cross to asphyxiate the victim. I mean, how cruel was ancient Rome? It is beyond your wildest nightmares. And I do need to speak about the worlds of ancient Greece and Rome in much more detail. Maybe that will be my next series, because you need to understand, we need to understand what the Bible is actually doing, what the New Testament writings are actually doing in presenting a conception of the world, teaching a conception of the world that could not be thought in ancient Rome, a world of human dignity and a world of mercy and a world of forgiveness and a world of human relationship that is moral. A few more passages. Preliminary procedures. In Roman law, a person condemned to death, including crucifixion, had to be scourged beforehand, with the exception of women, Roman senators or soldiers, but not in the case of desertion. Scourging was a particularly brutal procedure, performed with wooden staffs or a short whip, with several leather thongs into which small balls or sharp sheep bone fragments were tied. The person was stripped naked, tied to an upright post, and then flogged across the back, buttocks, and legs by one or two soldiers. Now, the cross weighed some 130 kilograms, more than that. And the part that the crucified one had to carry could be up to 57 kilograms. In Roman law, there was no limit to the extent of the flogging. The victim was then usually taunted, then forced to carry the crossbar, which again weighed up to 57 kilograms, tied across his shoulders to the place of execution. In addition to scourging, the condemned could also be maimed, for example, by excision of the tongue or other bodily parts, or blinding of the eyes. A set of Roman guards, commanded by a centurion, soldiers, accompanied the condemned to the place of execution and stayed on duty until the victim had died. Bystanders derided and taunted the condemned. I'm just jumping around a little bit. This is what happens in Jesus' crucifixion, which I need to look at with you. It's really a stunning moment at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. The arms were tied to the beam or fixed by means of iron nails driven through the wrists, rather than the hands, which sometimes could not carry the body weight without tearing loose. There's also evidence that these square nails, 13 to 18 centimeters long, 13 to 18 centimeters long, 1 centimeter thick, were occasionally driven through the upper forearms. On occasion, the victim was crucified upside down. Death on average would take from 3 to 4 hours. Earlier, it was mentioned 6, but 3 to 4 hours to 3 to 4 days. If there was a reason to expedite death, or to ensure that death had set in, the legs, one or both, were broken beneath the knees with a blunt implement, although axes and even toothed metal implements were sometimes used. Death could also be ensured by way of a club blow to the sternal region or a spear stab to the heart through the upper abdomen or chest. Occasionally, a smoking fire was lit at the foot of the cross to smother the victim. After death, Roman law allowed the family of the deceased to remove the body for burial after obtaining permission from a judge. Otherwise, it was customary to leave the corpse on the cross to be devoured by predatory animals and birds. Death by crucifixion was indeed excruciating. Literally, it comes from the word excruciates, which means out of the cross, in every sense of the word. Now, in the Gospel of Matthew, this is what happens when Jesus is taken to be crucified. He is beaten, he is forced to carry the cross, and when he is on the cross, he is mocked and he is humiliated. And this is what is said. This is what is said in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 27, verse 40 onwards. Maybe verse 39 onwards. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to. For he said, 'I am God's son.'" The bandits who were crucified with him also taunted him in the same way. Now, what are these people challenging Jesus to do? They are challenging Jesus to do something supernatural. The way they understand God and the way they understand what it means to be the Son of God, rather, the way they misunderstand God and misunderstand what it means to be the Son of God, is that the divine is able to do what no human being can do. So the divine is separate from the human being. The divine has special powers. The divine can do whatever is impossible. Nature or the laws of nature or the necessities of nature are no limit to the divine. So there is a mystical or mythical or a supernatural conception of the divine. And they are telling Jesus, if you are divine, if you are the Son of God, then do that. Now, that's what the devil had challenged Jesus to do in chapter 4 of the Gospel of Matthew. Challenged Jesus to do supernatural things. Challenged Jesus to turn stones into bread. Challenged Jesus to jump from the temple, high point of the temple, into the valley below, because the angels will lift up God's Son. There's a total misunderstanding, perversion, falsification of what it means to be God, what it means to be the Son of God, what it means to be the image of God. And in many ways, what we find represented in the Gospel of Matthew is a satanic, you can say, or idolatrous understanding from people who are supposed to be the religious hierarchy, the chief priests, and whoever else is mentioned in the gospel. That's all I want to say at this point. My name is Mohammed Kimji, I would welcome you contacting me on LinkedIn if you would like to connect. Thank you for your time.